The Army Painter is my favorite hobby company in the entire world. My desk is literally full of Army Painter products, and it takes me from being an average painter to putting above tabletop standard models out into the tournament scene. Not only that, but the Army Painter has sponsored more competitive play than any other hobby company in the industry. They allow us to keep doing the things that we do. If you enjoy the Army Painter as much as I do, head over to thearmypainter.com where you can use the discount code ARTOFWAR5 to get a discount on your next order. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Art of War. We're excited to be here as we are going to be ranking all of the Pariah Nexus missions, and boy is this packet full of good stuff. And a couple not so good stuff, but hey, it's got a lot of good stuff, a lot more than Leviathan in my opinion.
They added 5 additional missions, you know? They only had 15 the last time that we ranked them, and now you got 20.
20. So
this is a lot.
This should be super exciting. I know a lot of us here at the house are extremely excited about Pariah Nexus in general, so we kind of want to give a more in-depth breakdown of why we think certain missions are better for, various tournament play, and, what are the limitations of a couple of the missions here.
Yeah.
So we're going to get in depth on that. But before we do, if you like our content, please subscribe to the channel and tell your friends about us. All of that massively helps us grow. In addition, leave a comment below letting us know what your favorite of the Pariah Nexus missions are, or your least favorite. We'd love to hear it, and all of that interaction really helps us grow the YouTube channel. In addition, if you want to see more content from us, like us playing all the different Pariah Nexus missions, as well as Nick's mission series, where he goes through in-depth, 30, 40 minutes on every single mission, how to play them, how to take advantage of them, go ahead and head over to the warroom.vhx.tv. There's a 3-day free trial, and just released today, if you want it, there's also a Dark Angels vs. Sisters game with John and Nick's WTC list going head-to-head. That was a banger of a game. I know, we were all intensely watching that one as well. So come over, check out the content, and glad you joined us.
Absolutely. So not all 40k missions are created equal, right? Some are better than others. Some are more competitive than others. Some are more random, more wild, crazier than others. And that's what we have this tier list here to discuss. So for this tier list, we're going to be dividing the missions up into 5 different categories, basically on a gradation of like, how seriously competitive do we think these missions are? So we put a mission at S tier. We think it's like, that's the pinnacle of competitive play, evenly balanced or as even as you're going to get, and just a really solid mission that any tournament pack would be lucky to include. D, on the other hand, are the absolute jokes and stinkers. The ones that are heavily unbalanced for one reason or another, just not well thought out, just the ones that, that don't look good, right? If your tournament is made up of D tier stuff, you basically have a clown nose on. That's all I'm saying. That's just the way things are, right? Do I want it to be like that? No, but it is what it is. And then A, B, and C tier are just various flavors along that spectrum. Like A tier missions are going to be a solid mission. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not like the best of the best. B are fine, but have some problems. C are flawed on some level. And D are the absolute jokes. And I'm excited to go through all of these. They really changed them up with the Pariah Nexus. They changed up a lot of the primary. They kept some of them the same. The deployments also, the terrain format. So a lot of the context around these missions has changed, and I'm excited to go through them.
All right, well, without further ado, let's go ahead and head over to the tier list, and let's start with the old Mission A. We're going to just do them in order here, going from top to bottom, starting off with Take and Hold, Raise Banners, Tipping Point. So Tipping Point is a new deployment. That's the Staircase, Hammer, and Anvil. Raise the Banners. It gives you an extra point if battle line control an objective on the battlefield, and that is added to your secondary total, 1 per objective. So if you touch all 5 with battle line at some point and control it, you'll get 5 additional points. It's pretty hard to do. Usually you get 2 or 3, is what I've seen.
Yeah.
And Take and Hold is classic. 5 points for each objective that you hold, your home included, and up to 15 is the cap.
Yep, and this has the widest swath of terrain layouts at 6. That's Tipping Point. Personally, I've been a big fan of Tipping Point ever since it came out. I think it is a unique, different type of layout to Crucible of Battle, even though they look fairly similar on their face. I like that you get to start fairly deep in no man's land on one side and, far away from no man's land on the other. I also think it's a more usable deployment than Crucible, because towards the top of your deployment at Crucible is kind of useless because it gets so narrow that you can't really fit units there effectively. Whereas Tipping Point, you get a solid bar on the side that you get to use. I quite like Tipping Point. It might be my favorite deployment after Search and Destroy, personally. So I would put this at just a solid S tier myself. Take and Hold is a great mission. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Not only is this a cute reward for Battle Line, I like the different rewards that you have for Battle Line. It's not overbearing, it's not overpowering. If you don't have Battle Line, it's not the end of the world. But it does give you a nice bonus to have a more flavorful, kind of fluffy list. But Take and Hold, it means that if you do, rush down the objectives and you hold a bunch and hold it multiple turns in a row, you do deserve to have that primary lead. Like, you actually do. Whereas, same thing on the other side, if you do come back, your opponent trades most of their army the first 3 turns, you're able to come back because there's up to 15. So you go, okay, cool. Turns 4, turns 5, I get 15, 15. And all of a sudden, your opponent started with, like a 30. All right, now you're crushing them and it's going to be pretty even. I found this mission to be one of the better ones overall. And Tipping Point doesn't give an advantage one way or the other, generally.
No, I like it because it starts the game pretty like it starts the game almost in medias res a little bit because you're in the center of the board. You've already gotten to push up a little bit, not enough that you're right on top of your opponent, although you are fairly close if both players deploy directly across from each other in the little tip. You are fairly close if both players decide to do that, but if they don't decide to do that, you are just getting into no man's land early, which starts the game. It means turn 1 is a lot less of a, the footsies game, and you can actually start playing the game right away. I quite like it, and I think it's last time made S tier very easily, and I think this time makes S tier again very easily.
Yeah, I think so. I think Take and Hold is just perfect 40k at the end of the day. That's what you're looking for.
It feels comfortable, It feels like a nice blanket, like a nice security blanket, right? Take and Hold, nothing too crazy here. You just got to take the objectives the way, James Workshop intended.
Yeah, and there's both advantages going first and second, and I like that. I don't like when one side has too much of an advantage.
That would be crazy. Imagine if there are missions where you just are advantage on the scoring if you go first.
Or second.
Imagine. Or second. All right, speaking of which.
Here we go. Mission B is Purge the Foe. This is the quote-unquote kill points mission. This is the one where you get 4 points for killing something. You get 4 additional points for kill more, although you're not getting that in the first battle round. And then you get hold for 4 points. That could be any objective. That's just one objective to get full hold points. And then hold more, which is quite difficult to do on this mission.
Do you like playing 40k, or do you like playing a little mini game where you count how many kills you get and you just go for like tiny little, ooh, I got 4, you got 3.
Ooh, you got 4. I'm going to match 4, and I'm going to give myself the opportunity where if I have extra damage, I'm going to get 5.
Do you enjoy charging your opponent and having them roll wildly well and you don't kill them, but they kill you, and suddenly that's kill more? And like they get that then, and do you enjoy having your opponent know exactly how many kills you've gotten, and that's all they need to do is just get like, oh, you got 1 kill? I just need to get 2, and then they get 8. I don't like how it just turns 40k from 40k into a completely, not a completely different game, but like a related game, right? Like it's a little mini game.
It's like 8th edition 40k when the missions at that time were very much based around a similar scoring style. So I think it's more of an homage to that. The other aspects of it are Smoke and Mirrors, which I believe is bringing something back up into reserve. Or is that the one where you get cover? I think it's
that's Fog of War.
Okay.
Well, yeah, Smoke and Mirrors I think is you get to put them in reserve.
That's how relevant Smoke and Mirrors is.
It is not. So something about Purge the Foe.
Yeah, it's the one for putting stuff into strat reserve.
Yeah, cool. That matters.
Never.
Purge the Foe has 2 halves to it. 1, you have to hold more objectives, and 2, you have to kill more. And it almost always comes down to kill more, because hold more is a joke. And the reason it's a joke is because you get 1 victory point, or you get 4 victory points, sorry, you get 1 tick of primary for holding any number of objectives, and you get 2nd if you hold more than your opponent. So what this almost always means is you hold 2, your opponent holds 2, and you each just get 4 points. And that's it. If you're holding 3 and they kick you off the center, then you still get that. And if you only hold 1 objective, they hold 1 objective, that's still 4 points. It's very frequently we both hold, now we see who gets kill more. And whoever gets kill more gets 4 extra points every turn. At least they fixed the turn 1 nonsense where you could get kill more on turn 1 and just be out ahead 8 points. Or your opponent would go first, hang some stupid piece, and you go, I'm going to pick that off, 8 points. They fix that.
Well,
It's still 4.
they would draw like area denial. And it's like, am I going to give up 5 points on secondary just to not give up this? Maybe, but then that's a hard decision.
Yep. Or if somebody had indirect, they can pick off one little thing and be like, 8 points. Yay! They fixed that, which is good. That needed to be fixed. But yeah, I don't love how it just changes the game into a different mini game. I don't love that. It still plays fine. It still does. It's okay.
It also results in, because it's this combination of fighting over kill more, usually it's a pretty darn close game because it's very difficult to get hold more. So you're getting your hold points. You're probably getting a kill most turns. And then kill more is going to be either one person's getting a big advantage on it or it's pretty damn even. So how do you feel about it overall?
I feel like it's probably just like a B tier mission, right? Because like Tipping Point helps out a bunch. Smoke and Mirrors doesn't do anything. So it's really just how good is Purge the Foe? And like it's not a bad mission. It's just not my favorite. You know, it falls firmly in the middle of how I feel about missions, which is, oh, it's a bit weird. It's a bit wonky. It favors some armies over others quite heavily.
Yeah. Design wise, if you're playing like 30 Grey Knight Terminators with characters inside and like 2 trash units, well, you're not giving up many kill points, I'm going to say, for most of the game.
Yep.
Whereas if your opponent has Eldari MSU with all the Ynnari allies in, all right, they're giving up kills and kill more, guaranteed.
Yes.
And they're not really getting the benefit of holding multiple objectives because, you know, your opponent will probably be able to take you off of 2 of them. 2 of the center ones. So you'll hold 2 objectives. That doesn't matter as long as the other player's holding 2.
Yeah. So I don't feel like Purge is in like the top half of missions, but I don't feel like it's in the bottom half. It's just not my favorite.
All right. B for B tier.
And Tipping Point does help a lot because Tipping Point is a good deployment. If you have Purge the Foe on like Dawn of War, that would be like down in C. Just because, Tipping Point helps Purge the Foe in my mind, whereas something like Dawn of War would hurt it.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, next up we have Mission C, which is Lynchpin. This is primary, where if you hold your home objective, the other objectives on the battlefield, not your home, are worth 5. Your home is always worth 3. So if you happen to lose control of your deployment zone, your home objective, all of a sudden, even if you're holding a bunch of objectives in no man's land, you're still not scoring that many points compared to your opponent.
How do you feel about that mission?
I feel generally pretty good. I think this is one of the better missions, personally. It keeps game. I think it fits with the overall philosophy of Pariah Nexus, which is to have generally closer games, to have a lot less blowout games, to have more games go into turn 4 and 5 where both players still have to make decisions. So I actually quite like Lynchpin a lot. And it does reward, like, there's not too many rewards for actually taking your opponent's backfield anymore. Like in the previous one, where capture enemy output, there were some big swing factors. Now it's not quite as relevant. I like that this mission has something. It's not devastating, but it is something.
Yeah, and if you get into your opponent's backfield, it is pretty nasty. I did that this last weekend. I got Swooping Hawks onto my opponent's home field objective for 2 turns. And it was just like, yep, your primary just shuts off like a faucet you just turned off. Because you not only lose the 3, but you also lose 2 per objective they're on. And it's nasty.
Yeah, -7 points. Like, that's not good.
No, that's bad.
Fog of War is everybody has cover in the first battle round, and then I believe heroic, or you can't use generic strats.
Yeah. Core stratagems cannot be used on turn 1. It's a bit of a weird one, but it's not going to apply most of the time. Just don't take big risks on turn 1.
Yeah, so if you go for that charge and you need a CP reroll, well, no, it's not happening. Or you need to pop a heroic intervention bottom of turn 1. Not really happening.
How are you feeling about Mission C?
I think this is one of the best missions, period.
I like it. I like the deployment. I like the mission. The mission rule is whatever. I could see A or S, personally. Where are you feeling?
We didn't mention it either, but these first 4 missions also have access to most of the layouts, the not 3 and 5, which are the Dawn of War ones. So you also have a good swath of options for terrain layouts. So I honestly think it's up there with Take and Hold, personally.
There you go. Scorched Earth, Swift Action, Tipping Point, Mission D.
Right.
Last Tipping Point, which is sad. I like Tipping Point quite a lot.
I wish there were more.
I wish it was half Tipping Point, half Search and Destroy. Let's go. But Scorched Earth, Swift Action, Tipping Point. So Swift Action is interesting It is one of the more impactful battle line rules.
Yep.
One of the kind of misses about the Battle Line Matters of the mission pack, the Battle Line Matters theme, is that it only matters on some objectives, right? Some missions. So raise banners is like an extra point or two, whatever, including one battle line is not going to really make me too happy about that. Swift action, if you have an army that wants to be fighting or wants to be moving around the board with your battle line, they want to be like taking hits and advancing to do actions. Swift action is legitimately quite strong. But like if you have a squad of intercessors on your home objective, it literally does not matter. So I don't know how I feel about swift action. I think it's a little unbalanced because some armies get like a massive advantage out of it and some don't. But like the ones that get a massive advantage out of it are like Chaos Knights that don't necessarily, that aren't necessarily ripping the meta up otherwise. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's totally fair to have a strong battle line buff like this one. And then Scorched Earth is where you get up a cap of 10 on primary per turn. So it's 5 per objective. That includes your home objective. And then you can burn objectives. And burning, if it's your opponent, their home objective, it's worth 10. If it's any of the midfield ones, those are worth 5. So if you happen to control an area of the board and in late game want to burn an objective to get some extra points, you can do that. Or if you control, like your opponent is going to really push hard on this flank and you don't want to, if you can burn that early, all of a sudden it cripples their game plan. So it's a little awkward in that case, but once again, it's generally a mission that is relatively close in terms of scoring. It's not that easy to get a huge lead on this one. And I feel it's overall one of the more balanced missions.
Yeah, it is a bit draw factory because you cap out at 10 per. Now, this is the first mission here, probably one of two, where it makes it really hard to complete Unbroken Wall, if not outright impossible partway through the game.
Which is a secret mission.
Yeah, so if you take Unbroken Wall and your opponent burns an objective that you needed for it, get wrecked. So you really can't take Unbroken Wall in this mission, which requires you to hold 3 objectives outside of your deployment zone.
End of the battle.
And at the end of the battle. So that secret mission is a lot harder. So if you are not, right, you can't take a secret mission unless you have battle line that wants to get in their deployment zone at that point. So,
or a great warlord.
Or you have Magnus, realistically, who wants to get in there and double move and take your opponent's home objective. But it makes taking a secret mission significantly harder, like much, much harder. It doesn't make it like always, a miss, like Supply Drop. Supply Drop, you will never get Unbroken Wall, ever. But on Scorched Earth, it is very likely your opponent can burn an objective and just say, hey, you don't get it. Also, decently likely that if you take Unbroken Wall, you will need to not burn an objective. So, there's that. Anyway, I think it's fine. I think it's a fine mission. It probably is in like my top half of missions, but not by like a ton.
Yeah, I'm not excited to play Scorched Earth like some of the others, but it's a perfectly fine mission, and I'd probably rank it in the A tier.
Yes.
Like it is just a good mission to have as well.
Yep. Tipping Point does a lot of that work, though, in my mind.
And then, so those are going to be the first 4 tipping points. So those are all the ones that are on Step Ladder, Hammer, and Anvil. Now we're going to get into Hammer and Anvils, starting with Mission E, which is Take and Hold, classic 40k primary. Prepared Positions, is this the one you can bring stuff in turn 1?
No, Prepared Positions, I believe, is the free heroic and free go to ground for battle line.
Which is, I don't think it's ever come up in any of the games, but it can technically. There's like Custodies have good battle line.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't give them something new, right? It just gives you the ability to do it for free, which is nice, I suppose. Most battle line doesn't really want a heroic intervention. Some of them do. And because go to ground is free, you might as well use it every time you're targeted. Like, okay, sure.
Yeah, I personally haven't really taken much advantage of that mission rule. However, Take and Hold, Hammer and Anvil. Do you think this is on the same tier as the Take and Hold tipping point? Or do you think Hammer and Anvil makes it a little harder?
I think Hammer and Anvil is just one step down. I would probably say this is like A tier. The thing I don't like about Hammer and Anvil is how even the center objectives are. It's all 3 objectives are equally hard to control. And I like having the gradient of your home objective is really easy, and then the one directly above your deployment zone is like your natural expansion is what we call it, and then the middle is harder. Whereas on Hammer and Anvil, it can be brutal to try and control even one of the center objectives. They are at their closest together, so it's very easy for multiple units to overlap control over to every single center objective. Hammer and Anvil's a fine mission. I don't really have, or fine layout. I don't really have a problem with it. But if you had to, if you asked me to choose a favorite between Tipping Point and Hammer, it would be Tipping Point for that reason.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And the other thing you were mentioning about how hard it is to hold the middle objectives, when that happens, there is a much bigger incentive to go first because you at least get to stage on your opponent and make that even harder.
Yes, for sure.
And you can put all the pressure on your opponent past the objectives into their half of the, into their kind of deployment area. And if the battle's happening there for multiple turns, you will just hold primary at some point.
Yep, and the objectives are so close together that if you push forward, you can have your battle ball, like all your army together, and still control all three objectives. So it does reward a lot of pressure. Now, I like Hammer and Anvil. I do like it. But again, if you asked me to pick a favorite between it and Tipping Point, it would be Tipping Point. So to me, I feel like Take and Hold, Prepared Positions is a fine set. But Hammer and Anvil is just a little bit worse than Tipping Point, and so it places a little bit worse than Tipping Point.
Cool. All right, heading over to Jack's, one of his favorite missions here. We got Burden of Trust, Hidden Supplies, and Hammer and Anvil. So we got Hammer and Anvil deployment. Hidden Supplies means that the middle objective becomes 2 objectives in the middle. So 4 No Man's Land objectives, 6 objectives total, which means it can be very high scoring on primary. And then you have Burden of Trust, which is one of the most crazily written missions out there, and they have confirmed in the latest FAQ update that it does intentionally favor the person going first with an additional ability to score the guard action.
Okay, so
guard.
Whenever Burden of Trust comes up, we have to explain how it works because it is written not the best, is what I'll say. It is
overly
functionally
complex.
spaghetti code, realistically. So here's how it works. Actually, right? If you read it, you're going to get it wrong more than likely. Most people do. I would bet that this is probably one of the most misplayed.
It has to be the most.
It's got to be. It's written it's so hard to decipher what it means. So Burden of Trust. Here's how it works. At the start of your command phase, you score points. 4 points for each midfield objective, not in your deployment zone.
Yep.
Then turn 2 on in your command phase. You score your points for those objectives, then you can choose a unit on each objective to guard the objective. If at the end of your opponent's next turn, that unit is still on the objective, still in control of it, you get further 2 points for that objective. This can work on your home field objective. This can be on any of the midfield objectives. You need to pick a unit on the objective. They can do whatever the hell they like. They can do whatever they want, but they have to stay on the objective. As long as they're still on it, still in control of it, you score 2 extra points at the end of your opponent's turn, rinse and repeat. End of your opponent's turn, you score the 2 points, goes into your command phase, you score 4 points for it if it's a midfield objective, and you choose a new unit to guard. It can be the same unit, it can be a different one. It is wonky, I think is the best way to put it, and it's written poorly, and if you listen to my explanation, you still don't get it. Yeah, I get that, I understand. I don't love this mission. I think it's written very weirdly. I think the primary's fine, but 6 for each midfield is a little steep.
I also don't like that it doesn't score the home. I'm okay with the home scoring less, like on Lynchpin. I think that's totally reasonable. It's the easiest objective to hold. It shouldn't give you extra rewards. It shouldn't be the same points as a No Man's Land objective, which is a lot harder to hold. So I think, ultimately a lot of the ritual should have some sort of scoring at your home so you have a good baseline. Because things can just go wrong if you go second on these missions.
Yeah, and the thing that you might not get from me explaining it to you here is that it is just unbalanced. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's just unbalanced. If you go first, if you're the player going first, on turn 2, you can start the guards. At the end of your opponent's turn, you complete your guard. So end of your opponent's turn 2, you complete guarding. And you will do that at the end of your opponent's turn 2, 3, 4, and 5. You will get 4 opportunities to complete guarding objectives. If you are going second, you cannot start guarding until bottom of 2 because you can't do it in the first battle round. So you cannot start guarding until bottom of 2, which means you will complete it for the first time on the top of turn 3. So that means you will complete guarding on turn 3, turn 4, and turn 5. That's 3 times. So if you go first, you can complete guards 4 times. And if you go second, you can complete them 3 times. And that is unbalanced.
Especially because you can guard your home, which is not explicitly written in there.
Yep.
It's just, so some people don't even do it. That like actually happened at a bigger tournament recently. You can actually guard your home objective. It's just not worth any of the normal primary points.
Yep. So what this means is if you're going first, in addition to all the benefits that going first provides, which are substantial, in addition to all the benefits that going first provides, you get an extra 4 to 6 points. And that's nice. That's really good if you're going first. And it's really bad if you're going second.
Yeah, you get better staging, you get better points. You have all the advantages.
Yep. And like, I'm not going to say that like it's an insurmountable lead, but it just is unbalanced, right? The person going first has more opportunities to score points and is also going first. Why? Right? Because like on turn 5, you can start guarding on bottom of 5, but you'll never complete it. So there you go. Yeah, it's not a very well designed mission. It really needs the person going second to be able to start guarding on bottom of 1. That's really what it needs. And then it also needs to have its language cleared up a little. And then it can be a fine mission. It'll be a fine mission at that point. But because it is unbalanced, I would put it at highest it can go is C. And that's, I think, because it's got a good deployment or decent deployment.
Yeah, it has hammer and anvil. Although I honestly think hidden supplies is just a mistake in general.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
I think this is one of the worst missions here.
If you want to put it in D, I am not going to argue with Burden of Trust.
I think this
D.
is one of the worst missions that they've designed for sure. Especially this combination. It really should not have hidden supplies at all.
No,
that's crazy.
It's you also just are like rolling in primary, and it's basically impossible to stop.
Yeah,
because nobody wants to be the first one into their opponent's half of the board. There's a lot of problems with this mission. The fact that it's hammer and anvil hidden supplies is also like 4 objectives are within like 2 inches of each other. It's very like death ball rolls into center. Death ball gets 17 billion points, and then your home objective is only worth 2.
Let me add another reason why, Jack. The only options for layouts are 1, 7, and 8, which is
I see
a lot less than the other ones.
That is a problem with hammer and anvil generally.
Yep.
Because 7 is, I think, really cool for teams. Really not good for singles play.
No, and 8 is not that good either.
No, 8 is better for singles play, but it's still super wonky. And then table 1 is fine, but like it's kind of hard for a lot of tank armies to move around that board. I like table 1, but that's because I tend to play like fast melee armies, and they like table 1. Yeah, I would put it in D tier. I'm not going to defend. What am I defending? Burden of Trust over here? Come on.
All right. So then we have the ritual. So this is the mission in which you create objectives in no man's land. So you start with the one in middle, the middle objective, and then you create them henceforth. So this can be a low scoring mission early on, but then potentially higher scoring on the latter turns when you have multiple objectives created. It does require having extra units to do the action to create things. So that can be hard with the action economy of Pariah Nexus, where there's a lot of action secondaries. You also have to do a mission action. That can be stressful on more elite armies, for sure. Stalwarts allows you to, with battle line, shoot in, or action, engage a range, and fall back.
No, it's action, engage range, and shoot in action.
And shoot in action, yeah. So it, once again, privileges only a couple units, or really armies in the game. Not too many battle line units are massively damage dealing. You have like Admech Skitarii, Tau Breachers, the Custodian Guard unit, and Custodes with Draxes. But there's not too many units that benefit from this.
It is nice that this makes actions easier to complete on the ritual, which is good.
Yep.
It also means that if you charge into a unit of like intercessors, right, and you kill 3 of them and you're tying them up, I can start an action and then send a unit in to go rescue them out of that combat. And that
so they
will
don't
be
die.
Fine. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So I think Stalwarts helps with the ritual because otherwise the ritual is a little bit action overloaded. So I think that's a neat way to try and help fix that. I think it's cool. I don't really have too big of a problem with the ritual. It's fine. It's very drawy. Because only midfield objectives count. And there's only one midfield objective that you can, that is there at the start. So oftentimes what will happen is turn 1, both players create an objective. Turn 2, both players score that objective. And so it's 5 points each. And then turn, 3, both players score 2 objectives because they've created a second one, and then it's 15s all the way down. And it's actually quite hard to get an advantage on bottom of turn because both players are getting 15s at the end of the game, even if you're both sitting back. So like if both players sit back, they're going to get a 45. They get 5 on turn 2, a 10 on turn 3, and 15. If your opponent is super aggressive and pushes you completely out of the middle, they can get like a pretty big primary lead. But it is actually tough to come back if you're on bottom of turn because your opponent is getting 15s regardless, right? Because there's 9 objectives in midboard. They have to control 3 of them. Okay. Unbroken Wall is also just free. But so are primary, right? So is primary at the end of the game. So like Unbroken Wall is probably not going to get chosen because otherwise, right, you're placing your objectives. You're probably getting more than 20 points on primary.
You should.
So secondary mission or secret missions are a bit irrelevant because they cap you at 20. Like on a mission where you have 9 objectives and at the end of the game, do I want to be capped at 20 primary? No, I do not. So you probably won't be taking secret missions, and both players will be getting 15s end of game. So like it's tough to come back if you're bottom of turn because you don't get that primary edge on bottom of 5.
Yeah. So I think Hammer and Anvil is part of the draw issue here. Is that it's harder to attack your opponent on Hammer and Anvil compared to something like you're going to see the Rituals comboed with Crucible of Battle later. I think that's a better mission overall. So where do you think? I feel like this is the perfect like C tier area.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's just a flawed mission. I think it's a flawed combo, especially.
Yeah, Hammer and Anvil is very like both players sit back and just score the objectives that they have generated towards themselves. Because it's one thing I didn't talk about is that the board is so narrow on Hammer and Anvil that it's hard to get around and start forcing openings on your opponent. It's very easy for them to sit there with their perfect defensive position, and you sit there with your perfect defensive position, and you both score 45 on primary, and you see who drew better on secondaries.
Yeah, which is not the most interesting mission, I would say.
No.
All right, moving on to Supply Drop. Supply Drop is a mission that is dumb. It is so dumb.
Richard's least favorite mission.
By far my least favorite mission. It doesn't reward any sort of player skill whatsoever. It is just completely luck-based, and here's why. Okay, you've got 3 objectives in No Man's Land, right, Jack? 3 objectives.
Yeah, no, that's how I play.
One of them is going to disappear at the start of battle round 4.
Oh, that's bad.
At the start of battle round 5, another one disappears, and what's left is an objective that is worth a lot of points at the end of the game. 15, in fact. So, once the first objective disappeared, the points increase for the other 2, and then when the last one disappears and you have just 1 left in No Man's Land, that's worth 15. So what this effectively means is that it's really hard to get primary because it's quite low scoring.
It's only No Man's Land.
It's only No Man's Land. And if you are going first, it's still not that easy to hold your 1 expansion objective because once again, this is a mission. It's Hammer and Anvil, so it's like a little easier than Search and Destroy, but you're not the reward for holding the 1 in the early turns is nowhere near the value of holding the other ones in the later part of the game.
You also just don't have an expansion on Hammer and Anvil. And oftentimes, one of the objectives is behind a wall your opponent can hold easily. One of them is in the dead center of the board, and one of them is behind a wall that you can hold easily. And which one disappears last is massive. Which one sticks around till the end of the game and is a 15?
And because you don't get points for holding your home, if you don't have a supremely insurmountable points lead early on from going first, you will just lose this mission because your opponent has something and controls that if it's on their half of the board. If it's on your half of the board, you can actually play a relatively careful defensive game and just stop them from holding as much primary as you can and just glom up your army on that objective. And is that stupid?
Yeah, it's just not a well-designed mission.
This is a horrible mission. It's straight up D tier. I won't even hear anything else about it.
You weren't going to hear anything out of me.
This is one of the worst missions. I'm surprised it was kept from Leviathan. It was absurdly bad then. It is still one of the worst primary missions, for sure.
So the reason I think that it made the pack is because it is easy, if you have not played a ton of 40K, to assume that the 3 objectives in No Man's Land are equally easy to control for both players. And in that case, if both players know ahead of time which one's left, which one isn't, then it's fair. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. On any deployment that isn't Hammer and Anvil, they are straight up not, like they're just not even, right? The one above your deployment zone is way easier to hold than the one to the right of your deployment zone. The one to the right is further away from everything else. It leaves you stretched out along the board edge. It leaves you right next to your opponent's like main body of their army. It's just way harder to control. So if that is the one that is left, you're screwed. Your opponent gets a 15 end of game and you get a 0 at the end of the game. Cool. If it's the one directly above your deployment zone, same deal, except reversed. And if it's the no man's land one, well, then it comes down to which of your expansion objectives is worth 8 and which one is worth 0. Because if theirs is the one that disappears first and yours is the one that disappears second, you have 8 points on them, guaranteed almost. And it's just not designed particularly well. On Hammer and Anvil, it's a little bit better. It's still not enough to get it out of D tier, but even there, a lot of the time there is a ruin that like there's one objective your opponent can hold outside of line of sight, one objective you can hold outside of line of sight in the middle. I have lost games because at BFS, I played a game into Andrew Gagno, who's an incredible player, and our games are always super tight. I played him like 7 times in teams. I don't understand it. But what happened was they were on a board where he could not see with his Tau into the middle, and I was playing Custodes. So if the middle objective is the one that's left at the end of the game, I ragdoll him. I get like a 15 or a 16. But it was the one that disappeared first, which meant he got a 16. And it was just like, all right, cool. I guess we found that out, at the start of the game. We got to find out. Yeah, it was awesome. I had a great time, and not because of him. He's a gem, but, just
Games Workshop.
Games Workshop. If the center objective had been left, it would have just felt bad for him.
I think that's the thing, is that the center should be fixed. That should be the, whatever they call it, the alpha. Is it the alpha or the omega? I forgot.
It should be the one that stays.
It should be the one that stays, and then which one of the other two disappears on 4 versus 5, that's what should be rolled for. Yeah. I think you do that minimum fix, and then you start with the home objective being worth like 2 points or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I also hate that if yours is the one that disappears second, you just have 8 points on your opponent. Straight up.
Yep, easily.
Yeah. So.
A terrible mission.
Yeah. Okay. Also, you can't come back on it because...
Yeah, there's no comeback.
There's no comeback mechanic because you can't pick Unbroken Wall. So you can't just say, I'll hold all 3 of the No Man's Land objectives at the end of the game, right? I'll just wait and make up the primary that way. You can't. The midfield objectives disappear. You cannot hold 3 at the end of the game. They're not there. You can't even hold your opponents and 2 because there's 1 in midboard. So you can't pick Unbroken Wall. So you either need to, on Hammer and Anvil, punch through their lines and put a battle line unit in their deployment zone hard, or punch through their lines and put your Warlord on their home objective, which again isn't worth any points, and you have to punch through their lines to do so. You can't really take a secret mission on this, and otherwise there's really no way to make up for the fact if your opponent just has the objective left on their side of the board. Oops.
All right, next up, we got Burden of Trust again. This is mission I. Prepared positions, and then Search and Destroy is the deployment here. So Search and Destroy is table quarters, and remember how we were talking about Burden of Trust as a mission that explicitly favors the person going first?
Yes.
Guess what? Search and Destroy also typically favors the person going first because it's the closest deployment situation.
It is fairly close. I think Burden of Trust is just really not well designed. I do think Search and Destroy, I like it better than Tipping Point because at least it lets you start,
You like it better than Tipping Point or Hammer and Anvil?
Both.
Both.
Search and Destroy is my favorite deployment zone.
Yeah, it is. It would be.
I would play it using any army against any army. I'll play Search and Destroy against World Eaters every day of the week. I don't care. I love Search and Destroy personally. But yeah, Burden of Trust is not doing it any favors here. It's unbalanced for the person going first, a person who does not need an advantage inherently, and that's really what there is to say about it.
And prepared positions is that heroic for 0 or go to ground for 0 CP, which usually doesn't come up. So effectively, this is Burden of Trust with a closer deployment, which I think is as bad as F, if not even worse.
I'm not going to argue on behalf of Burden of Trust. I like Burden of Trust on Search and Destroy better than Burden of Trust on Hammer and Anvil.
But it's a mission that favors first, and then you have the deployment that favors first the most.
Yeah. Well, Burden of Trust with hidden supplies is probably whatever. It's the Burden of Trust.
They're
it's
both.
yeah, it's a joke. That's not ideal.
All right, moving on to Lynchpin. So Lynchpin's back, and then it has Raise the Banners attached with it this time, and then Search and Destroy. And also, I didn't mention in the previous one, Search and Destroy has layouts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, many of which are very good boards in general. So it has a good set of options for terrain layouts, unlike the Hammer and Anvil boards. So I think this mission is fantastic. I already like Lynchpin as a primary mission. I like Raise Banners as a mission rule. And then Search and Destroy is perfectly reasonable on this combination.
Yeah, Mission J is one of my favorite missions, which, Mission J, Mission J, Mission Jack.
A tier or S tier?
I'd say S tier.
Yeah. I think this is one of the better. You can just have a game of 40K on a table. The mission isn't going to give any one player too much of an edge, and that's what we're really looking for at the competitive match play team events or regular events.
I like it better than Mission C, because Mission C, if we look at it, is Lynchpin, which this one also is. I think Fog of War is
irrelevant.
Fog of War is, I think, just worse than Raised Banners, because occasionally it can just screw you over. And then I like Search and Destroy more than Tipping Point. So big fan of Mission J. I'll play it all day, every day.
All right, next up we have Scorched Earth back again, and then Stalwarts this time. So being able to shoot and do actions, which is quite useful, as well as an engage range. And then Search and Destroy as the deployment, of course. So Scorched Earth, we ranked the other version of Scorched Earth, Mission D, in A tier. And how do you feel about this one, this version of it?
I don't love Scorched Earth generally, but I do like Search and Destroy quite a bit, so I'm willing to put it up in the same tier, basically.
Yeah, I think it's roughly in the same category. I think the biggest thing here is that the primary comboed with the deployment is a little, and / terrain layouts is a little more impactful than the mission rule generally. The mission rules are not as relevant generally.
No.
They're more circumstantial than defining of a combo.
Yeah, I mean, if you have battle line and your opponent doesn't, you'll score 1 to 3 more points than they do. Okay, sure.
It's cool.
All right.
That's usually not going to be the difference in most games.
No.
All right. Take and Hold. This is the last of the Search and Destroy missions. Take and Hold Hidden Supplies. So once again, 6 objectives in the middle, and then Search and Destroy deployment. This one is probably the highest scoring version of Take and Hold because of Hidden Supplies. It's pretty easy to get 10s, and then 15s is easier than on the other version of it.
Yeah, I really do not like Take and Hold with Hidden Supplies, and the reason for that is both players are incentivized to just sit there and get 15s. That's really it. You have 3 objectives on your side of the board, you have 3 objectives on the other side of the board. You don't have a middle objective that both players are evenly in control over to fight over. You just don't have that. And so without having that, both players just have a little objective triangle on their side of the board that they can sit on and feel comfortable, and they'll both get 15s for the entire game. And it's not worth it to take your opponent's, the tip of their triangle off of them, because, if you take it off of them twice, they still get a 50 on primary. So you have to take it off them 3 times to see a 5-point difference. And that is A, tough, and B, probably not worth it.
It's a lot of resources.
It's a lot of resources. Right, because if turn 2, I contest their objective that's forward, they get 10. Turn 3, I do the same thing, they get 10. Then I don't do it because I've thrown a bunch of resources away doing this, and I just don't have them ready, or they've successfully defended the objective, they get a 15, they do it again, they get a 15. Suddenly they have a 50, and I did not affect their primary at all, and I threw 2 units away for funsies. So I don't love how stally and grindy and drawy this mission is. If you see 100-100 tie, dude, it's going to be on this mission. I swear. It's good. Because, both players could just get perfect secondary cards, especially if it's, Eldar on Eldar, and then this is just a 50 on primary that's printed on your score sheet. So...
Do you think this is B or C?
Man, I don't know. How are you feeling about it?
I think... I think this is probably C. Personally, because let's see what we put at B, which is Purge the Foe. I think that's a more interactive mission overall than this. Yeah. I think this is one of the missions that de-incentivize interaction, and that's generally what we shouldn't be looking for.
I agree. It's weird how so small of a change actually makes a huge impact on take and hold, which is probably
Hidden
the
supplies
best.
is just not good.
Hidden supplies is just not a great idea. At least it's not hidden supplies on servo skulls. But hidden supplies on take and hold like fundamentally breaks the points economy that take and hold sets up, which is like a fairly finely balanced, tool, right? 5, 10, 15, that's great, right? If you control 3 objectives, you get a 15. You've earned it, Chief. And otherwise, you have a 10-point baseline every turn. And if your opponent dings you down to 5, like it's a great gradient of if you do well, you get a 15. If your opponent does well, you get a 5. And so there's a good range in there of things to do. If your opponent does insanely well, you get a 0, right? But if both players are going to just get 50 points, unless their opponent like all-ins them, then that breaks that economy and makes it not work. Like it makes it just fundamentally broken. And also there isn't, as I said, there isn't a second center objective that both players can fight over. Both players get their little fiefdom and sit on it. And then, cool.
Next up, we have Purge the Foe. This is Mission M. A rapid escalation, which I believe Battle Line can come in turn 1 from Strat Reserve. And then Crucible of Battle. So this is the first of the Crucible of Battle missions, which is like diagonal Hammer and Anvil. It's one of the more interactive deployments, in my opinion. It's easier to attack around certain angles and open up parts of the board. So Purge the Foe here. Once again, how you feeling about Purge the Foe?
I don't love it.
I know you don't love it.
Personally.
I think this is probably one of those B tier ones where it's not the best way to create interaction because it's a weird like micro game inside, but at the same time, it's a little bit more interesting than the missions below, is what I would say. Because Crucible of Battle, I really like Crucible of Battle as a deployment personally.
That's fair.
I think it results in more interesting games generally, significantly more so than Hammer and Anvil. Hammer and Anvil is just not a good deployment either.
Grindy and stally, yeah.
It's better than Dawn of War.
But it's, at least it's one of the 4 real deployments. But yeah, I think Crucible's good. I think Purge the Foe probably just ends up right next to Purge the Foe tipping point. Don't really. It's
not a spectacular mission. It's not going to actively harm. Like if you're a TO and putting this in there, it's not actively going to harm the event, like some of the ones below it. But it will be, not the people's favorite mission to play.
Yeah. What I'll say is, if you're a TO, just you don't need to include Purge the Foe in the mission pack. It's just kind of a weird game that develops. You don't need to put it in there, but yeah, whatever.
And then mission ends. So this is the ritual for the second time. Swift action, ability to advance and fall back and do actions for Battle Line, and then Crucible of Battle. So this one of the ritual I like a bit more than the previous version. Ritual on Hammer and Anvil is very defensive because Hammer and Anvil as a deployment is hard to attack your opponent. I think on Crucible, there's more interesting attack paths because the terrain is more open, generally.
Yeah, and a lot of the time you'll see people going in opposite directions as they push forward, because you can't generate an objective within 6 inches of an existing objective. So what they'll do is they'll generate one as close to their deployment zone as possible, and now they need to generate one to the side of it. And so you see both players go, they start here, and then they just go around each other. And at least that generates motion, which either you can try to stop by blocking them from being able to go that direction, or you try to force through your side faster, which I think is cool. And I like it. I like it a lot better than the one on Hammer and Anvil. That's just a grindy stall fest.
Is it B or A? I think it's better than the Purge the Foes.
I do, but still Ritual's like super weird. I don't like.
We can put it at top of B.
Yeah, I'd say top of B probably.
Okay, that's fair. All right, Terraform. So this is the only primary that we haven't, or this one of 2 primaries we haven't discussed so far. Excuse me.
One of the only real primaries we haven't discussed.
So this is another one that is just kind of crazy.
It's just better if you go first.
It's just better if you go first. So on Terraform, you want to take this away. I know you love Terraform.
So Terraform, there you can do an action. So guarding objectives, not an action. But Terraform, it is an action. So what happens is if you're on an objective you control, you can start terraforming the objective. If at the end of your opponent's turn, they have not taken the objective or killed your unit, you complete the action and you have terraformed the objective. If one player terraforms an objective, their opponent cannot do so.
That is huge.
It is fairly huge. I'm going to argue it's less impactful than people make it out to be, but it is. I'm not going to lie and say it's nothing. And then from then on out, every objective on the board, including your home, is worth 4 points, up to a max of 15. But if you have any terraformed objectives, each of those will generate you 2 victory points, whether you control it or not. And so you do get a lot of passive income off of that. Going first, the theoretical go first, terraform all 3 objectives in no man's land, pass it. You can't terraform your deployment zone.
I haven't seen it happen.
I've not even seen it come close to happening. I'm sure that people in the comments are going to be like, my friend Jeff, the other day, he did it to me and it sucked. And like, yeah, it probably would suck, but I haven't even seen it come close. Usually what happens is that the player going first establishes terraform over their expansion a turn earlier than the player going second. Then the player going second gets to terraform a couple at the end of the game, or gets to terraform 1 at the end of the game, or gets it on turn 3 and has bottom of turn primary, which, yeah, slightly favors the player going first. What I will say is if you deploy in such a way that your opponent can move on to the center objectives and terraform all 3 of them, and you have nothing to say about it, then yeah, you will lose. You will lose to that, probably.
And I will say, adding on to that exact point, is that this is Crucible of Battle. And so it is one of the ones where you can actually be able, with positional advantage, to come back, even if your opponent has 2 of the passive scoring objectives.
Crucible is also one of the ones where you have your strongest control over your expansion objective, which means that your opponent is not going to terraform that on turn 1 unless you literally just pass out in the middle of their turn and wake up at the end of your turn, right? I think the theoretical of someone going forward and terraforming a whole bunch of objectives and the game ending on the spot is scary. I've not seen it even come close to happening. Let me put it this way. I played into Quentin and I was playing World Eaters and I was going first. And I put Angron behind a wall on the center objective. A unit he can't really deal with that efficiently, and he was terraforming the objective with a bunch of OC on it. And I did not complete the action. He managed to take it away from me. And I lost some resources for trying, right? Like, it's, if your opponent knows what's up and they know that they have to try to contest it, you probably aren't going to try, because then you just lose resources for free. And I don't know. I think my personal opinion is that the imbalance of Terraform is overblown. I don't think it's like the best design mission of all time, because the potential is there to terraform a bunch of objectives. But the reward isn't that high for getting it, right? Because by the time you get it, right, like if I terraform all 3 objectives on turn 4, I'm only realistically looking at a couple extra points, because I'm in control of all 3 objectives in no man's land. I'm getting a 15 either way. It caps at 15. It does not go higher than 15. So if you've terraformed all 3 objectives on turn 4, you're not actually getting that many more points. I do agree it is imbalanced. It is imbalanced, and it can lead to non-games, which is not amazing. But I think that the whoever goes first just terraforms all 3 objectives. How often going first is your opponent can just normal move to an objective and hold it through your turn? That doesn't happen that often, especially if you know I got to take it from them.
I think this version of Terraform, you'll see there's a second one later, is significantly better than the other one because of Crucible.
Oh yeah, the other Terraform is going straight down.
Do you think this is a B tier with the Purge the Foes, or?
I think it's probably, I could see it in either, to be honest with you. C tier because it is actually unbalanced, even if it's not as unbalanced as people think it is.
Top of C is fair.
Yeah, or bottom of B just because whatever. I mean, this makes it look very nice, you know.
Yeah. So aesthetics is important.
Aesthetics is important.
Then we have Mission P, Back to Scorched Earth, Inspired Leadership. If your warlord's outside your deployment zone, it's a +1 leadership aura for units within 9, I believe. And if they're visible.
If they're visible, yeah.
Yeah. So, doesn't come up too often, but it's great against Tyranids.
Well, this is going to be the last mission that is in contention for S tier.
Yep.
Even possibly, because we're about to go to
the last Crucible.
It's the last Crucible. It's the last before we get to the deployments that I actively don't like. So, I don't know. I think this one's fine, right?
I think this is more of an A tier one. I don't think it's S tier.
No, I don't think it's S tier.
I think it's just Scorched Earth results in very good, interesting games, although they don't have a huge disparity between them. But I always like games where I can look back and say it came down to, these 3 or 5 moves.
Yes.
These are the 3 or 5 things. I don't like when it's, the objective was on my opponent's side with 15 points end of game supply drop.
Yep.
That I don't like.
You definitely have to go through a little bit more work to either leverage going second or leverage going first. Because in order to break the 10-point cap per turn, you have to either have enough pressure that you can burn objectives that your opponent would like you to not burn and just get points off them. Or going second, you have to be able to go out, control 2, and burn a third to get your 15. So you can have a bonus on primary if you're going second, but you have to work for it. And you can have a bonus on primary if you're going first, but again, you have to work for it. So I think it's fine, personally.
All right, we got 4 missions left, and these are the ones that if you're a TO, you got to avoid them, and you're going to find out why. So, Mission Q, Supply Drop. All right, we're starting off on a bad foot here. Then we have Rapid Escalation. Cool, you can bring a battle line in turn 1. That's relevant. Sweeping Engagement. So this is the stepladder version of Dawn of War. Only slightly better than Dawn of War, in my opinion.
Again, agree.
However, the only terrain layouts, and this is very important, usually there's a lot of relatively balanced ones. You can see that in Crucible and Tipping Point have the most and Search and Destroy have the most balanced choices for terrain layouts. This one only has 3 and 5. If you go over to the terrain layouts 3 and 5, you will notice that you can shoot your opponent anywhere.
It's not as bad as in teams. In teams, all 8 tables will be up for grabs on every deployment, and on Hammer and Anvil or Tipping Point, table 5 is just there with all the terrain pointed the wrong way. It's not as vile there, but it is still pretty open.
It's darn open. The objective, try holding objectives in no man's land. It's very difficult. So this is horrible. Supply Drop is terrible, but Sweeping Engagement makes it dramatically worse than the other version of Supply Drop, in my opinion.
I want to give Sweeping Engagement credit for being better than old Sweeping Engagement.
That is true.
The reason I hated Sweeping Engagement previously was because it felt like if let me see if I can get the camera right. If this is your deployment zone, right? You actually don't get to use this part of your deployment zone.
No, it's too narrow.
It's too narrow.
You couldn't fit anything in there.
So your deployment zone was basically that. And it pretended to be otherwise, but it was basically that. Whereas Sweeping Engagement, because it is stepladder, means you actually get to use the right half of your deployment zone, which I think is super cool. It's still not great. I don't love it. I don't like the super wide deployment zone. It leaves units stranded. It feels bad to play on. It leaves you very vulnerable to an aggressive army if you can't handle it, or just an army that looks to blow you up because they have the widest angles to shoot you from the sides. It's so hard to hide. I don't love it. I like it more than Dawn of War, which is my least favorite deployment and has been my least favorite deployment for like the last
it's the worst
6 years or whenever we moved away from having.
What was the one that was like a little triangle?
Oh,
at the bottom? That was the worst
or something, something like that.
It was Dawn of War style, but it was just a little triangle in the middle of your deployment zone.
Yeah, didn't love that.
That one was terrible as well. Glad we didn't see that come back.
I remember when it was just Dawn of War. You just played on Dawn of War. That's all you played. And then they switched it up and they gave you Vanguard Strike, which is very close to Crucible of Battle. Probably a little better than Crucible of Battle, actually. And very tough to measure out, though. And Hammer and Anvil. And ever since then, ever since they split that off, Dawn of War has been my least favorite deployment every single time. But we'll cover that when we get to Dawn of War. Sweeping Engagement is the next worst thing, though.
Next, we have Mission R, which is Terraform. We already know that's imbalanced. Swift Action. It's a pretty solid mission rule. And then Sweeping Engagement. Options 3 and 5 for layout.
I think Swift Action on Terraform is really stupid.
The ability to advance with battle line and do your...
Why not make it really easy to
Terraform
just start doing Terraform on turn 1? The thing that I said was not that impactful. Why don't we make it easier to do? And it's on Sweeping Engagement. Slam this nonsense in D immediately.
Just so dumb.
Yeah.
It's comical, honestly.
Yeah, like if I just have Custodian Guard, I'm advancing onto the side.
100%. My Skitari, they're flying up.
Yeah, just get them in there. Because ordinarily, you also can't really contest objectives on turn 1 with a normal move. It takes an advance, usually. So you'll usually throw it up on your expansion objective on turn 1. Your opponent throws it up on their expansion objective on bottom of 1. And both players get to play. It's taken hold, but you score it funnily, right? Like it's taken hold at that point, but you score 4 for your home and 6 for your expansion instead of 5 and 5. Cool.
But we're playing Sweeping Engagement where the ability to go first and get angles on your opponent is magical.
Yes. Yes, you can. So I don't like it, and there it can lie.
All right. Mission S has Lynchpin as its primary. We already like Lynchpin as a primary.
Lynchpin is quite good.
Raise banners. We also like that mission rule. That's a very solid mission rule. Helps the battle line centric armies, or just if you have a couple. gives you some extra secondary points in case you happen to draw poorly on particular cards. But it has Dawn of War layout 5 is the only option.
Yeah, Dawn of War is at least a little better in my opinion because it is 12 inches forward instead of 10, which means you're not quite so pressed up against your board edge as you are on as you were on previous Dawn of Wars, right? 10 inches up means you have a 10-inch deep deployment zone. It's very shallow, whereas 12 inches up helps a lot. What I will say is I think that this is a mission where the deployment zone is holding it back, but I think it's still fine. Lynchpin, Raise Banners is a solid combo.
Do you think this is B or C?
I think probably B. Lynchpin, Raise Banners is just
I think
good
Lynchpin raises it up a decent amount here, frankly. Because even if your opponent does get significantly ahead, it's still not that far because of this rule. And it's a lot easier to attack your opponent's home objective if you take one of their flanks on Dawn of War.
Dawn of War, the objectives are so far from each other that it almost becomes 3 separate battles, and you find out who, best 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Right? If I win the center and the flank, I win the game. Otherwise, I lose the game, and it just feels like it's not one army fighting another army. It feels like 3 armies fighting 3 armies, and you see who wins 2 of 3 fights. I don't love it, but it's a good mission, so it raises it up quite a bit.
Then we got Unexploded Ordinance, Mission T. This is what used to be called Servo Skulls. And it is back, slightly updated, and Inspired Leadership is the mission role. Once again, that doesn't come out too often, and Dawn of War layout number 5.
Yeah, so they put it on Dawn of War. They only put one Unexploded Ordinance
This is the last mission.
Yep, this is the last mission. It's T for terrible. So, one thing I will say something nice about Unexploded Ordinance. If you are not taking the game seriously, and you just want to slam hams at your opponent, right? Just play
Roll
some
some
Warhammer.
dice, eat some pretzels.
Yeah. This mission is the most fun you can have. No question about it. You're both just jamming your army into each other, throwing the objectives around. Things are moving. Things are getting weird, right? It's the most fun you can have playing Game of 40K if and only if you are not being competitive at all, right? If you are not trying to use strategy and tactics to win a game of 40K, something we find very fun, right?
Very fun.
Very fun. If you're not doing that, it's a blast. And I've played it a couple times, and it was a blast. But it was also the most unbalanced mission in the pack, in my opinion. It has the biggest delta between going first and going second, and let me explain to you why. So, you go first. You kick all 3 objectives directly towards your opponent. And no wishy-washying around. You go directly towards your opponent. Don't try and go to the sides or
get clever.
Don't get clever. Directly at your opponent. So, you kick all 3 objectives, bink, 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 directly at your opponent. Okay. Your opponent kicks them back. So now they're on the center line again. You kick them back towards your opponent again. You score points because they're within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. Your opponent kicks the objectives back to the center line. They score nothing because they're on the center line. Then you kick them back towards your opponent's deployment zone, and you score points for each objective because they're within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. And then your opponent kicks all 3 back, and they score nothing because they're not. They're on the center line again. And you rinse and repeat this a couple times, and you are the only player scoring primary. That's it. It's the most deeply unbalanced mission in the pack. If you're going first, your opponent, you have to break your opponent's army before you can score primary.
Mm-hmm. That's not easy to do.
It's not easy to do, especially as they're kicking the objectives. So like the first 3 turns of the game, you're just kicking them back to where they were, and then you don't score points. And then they kick them back, and then they do score points. What are we doing? Why is that? Going second has no benefit at all. It's actively like super harmful. If you go second and you win Servo Skulls, my God, you put in the work.
You killed your opponent. They are dead.
They're dead. You had to table them by like turn 3. Otherwise, that's it. Because you can't score primary until they stop kicking them back. You just can't. You need to kick them once and then kick them again. And then you can score as much primary as they did for kicking it the first time. And it's a terribly designed mission. There is an interesting and cool concept in there somewhere, I promise. But like, my God, you only score if you go first? What are we doing? Like the onus is so hard on the person who's going second to do things.
And a lot of things all at once.
A lot of things. I don't understand it. I really think that kicking objectives around the board and scoring points for them is a really cool and interesting idea. It is just so transparently favored for the person going first that I can't rank this mission anything higher than the worst in the game.
It is the worst in the game.
Yeah.
But boy, if you just want to eat some pretzels, man,
Oh my God, is it
you're
fun?
going to have fun.
It's so fun. It is. It really is. But yeah, it's so imbalanced. If they made it balanced in some way, like if they balanced out the points and they made it so like some nuanced scheme where the player going second has some advantage for, kicking the objectives, or like the player going second just has to get them within 18 inches of their opponent's deployment zone or something to score points, then cool. I would have a blast with this mission. This mission creates some amazing games, but it is competitively very stupid. And that is it. That's all I'll say.
All right. Well, that's our ranking there. Hope everybody enjoyed this one. We got Stephen Horowitz, who's been a member for 27 months at the gold tier. Thank you so much, Stephen, for being with us for so long. Burden of Trust, F tier, worst mission ever. Rather play Servo Skulls. It's the worst until you go second on Servo Skulls.
Yeah. Also, something about Servo Skulls or Unexploded Ordinance is that the best plan every time, bar none, is to take your army and take all of it and just put it in the center. Just all 2,000 points on the center objectives. And that gets the game going right off the jump, and it's fun. But yeah, it's really dumb. It's really stupid.
So those are our rankings. If you enjoyed this one, please let us know if you agree or disagree. Which ones are you most excited about in the comments below? In addition, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell your friends about us. All of that massively helps us grow. And finally, if you want to see more content from us, including a in-depth breakdown of every single mission in the game in Pariah Nexus, go ahead and check out the War Room, thewarroom.vhx.tv. There's a 3-day free trial, and there's tons of awesome content you're going to find in there, including today's Dark Angels versus Sisters game, pitting Nick and John's WTC lists head-to-head. So really exciting game. Come on over, check it out. We really appreciate everybody's support. And just thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you all next time for plenty more content. So long for now.
Bye-bye.